We're going to start right at the very top with tier 1. It's the 4 names that you would probably have guessed. It's Josh Allen at 1, Jalen Hurts at 2, Patrick Mahomes at 3, and Lamar Jackson at 4. Fitz, when you were looking over this list, did any of these names stand out as particularly surprising, whether or not they were in the tier or the order they were in, or is this pretty chalky?
I think it's pretty chalky. I don't really want any part of Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts this year. And like Josh Allen, I get it. He has been the QB1 in I think 3 of the last 4 years. In the year he didn't finish QB1, he was a close QB2. But man, I feel like we should be learning our lesson with what Patrick Mahomes went through last year, where he was undermanned in terms of wide receiver firepower. In Mahomes' previous 5 years as a starter, he had averaged at least 20.9 fantasy points per game, going as high as 26.1 fantasy points per game. Last year, down to 18.4. Really hamstrung by, he had Travis Kelce, he had Rashee Rice, who was just kind of a short area catch and run guy, and he was just bereft of wide receiver firepower. Otherwise, just didn't have guys who could make plays downfield. Now I worry that maybe Josh Allen is in the same position. They got Keon Coleman in the draft. I like him, but he's untested. They have Khalil Shakir, who I like, also relatively untested. They just don't have a lot of proven talent at wide receiver. And I'm concerned. I don't know if the 15 touchdown runs from last season are repeatable. Probably not, based on the track record. So just as we saw a drop-off from Patrick Mahomes last year, I'm worried about that sort of drop-off from Josh Allen. And I think we are maybe undervaluing Patrick Mahomes based on last year. Now he's got Marquise Hollywood Brown. He's got Xavier Worthy. If Rashee Rice doesn't have an ultra-long suspension, he's going to have him too. His cupboards are full again at wide receiver, so I'm kind of all in on Mahomes. And Hurts, it's just, we saw a drop-off in his passing numbers last year. Goes from 8.0 yards per attempt to 7.2. 15 interceptions. He had kind of a bad year without Shane Steichen, who had been his offensive coordinator the 2 previous years. Steichen takes the Colts head coaching job. And, do we really want to count on a guy who got so much of his value from those tush-push touchdowns now that Jason Kelce is retiring? And I don't know if the tush-push is going to work as well. So both of those guys are a little risky to me to be at the top of tier 1.
Yeah, it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking, this is like a little deja vu. I think we've discussed this before. The 3 of us did discuss this at our, fun little virtual happy hour last week when we were the only 3 to show up, and we talked about the quarterbacks. It was definitely a preview of what this episode is going to be. I'm with you on Allen and Hurts. I feel like there's just question marks there, and the position is so strong that if I'm going to take a guy where I have to be drafting those to get them on my team, I don't want question marks, at a position like this. And there exists. You laid them out really well with Allen and Hurts. And I think even maybe to a degree with Lamar, obviously he's going a little later than those two. If I'm drafting in this tier, it's very likely going to be Mahomes for me this season. Erickson, what do you think about this grouping?
Yeah, I think that it is pretty chalky, but the way that I always kind of view the quarterback position, it's a value game. Why would I draft Josh Allen in round 2 when I get Mahomes in round 4, right? Because they're all in the same tier, and that's what the consensus is agreeing. Like, these guys are the elite of the elite, but I see the value as taking Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, because those guys are the ones that usually go the latest among the elite tier. So I would rather take Mahomes or Lamar Jackson for some of the reasons that Fitz laid out. With Mahomes, last year stands out like such an outlier for him. It's the first time he's ever outside the top 7 quarterbacks. First time he's ever been below 20 points per game. Like, that stuff's going to bounce back. It's going to regress positively just based on the massive sample size we have of Patrick Mahomes as the NFL's best quarterback. So I'm not concerned about it. It's like, I want to buy the dip on Patrick Mahomes because of how he just kind of fell off last year. 2 years ago, he was fine without Tyreek Hill. He threw for 5,000 yards, throwing touchdowns left and right. So I like the Mahomes value. And then Lamar, I love Lamar too. He was still first in quarterback rushing last year, second in points per game, nearly 23 fantasy points per game. And that was his first year in the Todd Monken offense. And Mark Andrews missed half the season. So you have a concern, okay, Andrews coming back healthy, Zay Flowers entering year 2. Now, and the other thing too I want to point out about the Ravens is is this defense going to be as good as it was last year? I don't think so. I think they're going to take a step back, especially without their defensive coordinator, who's the Seahawks head coach now. So I have concerns in looking at the schedule again, doing some schedule analysis here. The Ravens have a brutal schedule. Like, their defense is going to get tested. And if their defense gives up points, that means we're going to see Lamar Jackson drop back to throw a ton. And I think that's going to lead to more rushing, more touchdowns, more passing. And I think that's going to lead for good things for this offense overall. So I'll let others take Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts ahead of me, and I'll let Mahomes and Lamar Jackson fall.
I don't think that the defense is going to be worse. I don't think it's going to be bad, though. I mean, it is going to be tested. They are going up against really good offenses. To your point, like the slate is not going to be easy. But like, I still think they'll be like
from an elite defense though, to like average or like above average.
I think they'll be a good defense, but they're not going to be the best defensive football, which is what they were last year. Like, I still think they'll be pretty good, maybe in that like 12th best defense in football range. But that is a significant drop off from what it was a year ago. Like, no doubt, particularly with McDonald gone. Last question on this tier, Fitz. Is this? You obviously said that you weren't going to be drafting a lot of Allen and Hurts, and I agree with you. Do you still think that Allen should be QB1? It's just that he's going early enough that you'd rather wait for Mahomes, or would you rank somebody like Mahomes higher?
I have Mahomes QB1 this year, okay. Allen QB2, and I've debated moving Lamar ahead of Josh Allen. So okay. Josh Allen QB2 or QB3 for me. I actually don't have Hurts on this tier at all. I've got him on the next tier at QB6, I think, in my rankings.
Let's go to that next tier. Tier 2, it's 5 through 9, and it's CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, and Kyler Murray. Again, that's Stroud, Richardson, Burrow, Dak, and Kyler. First of all, Fitz, you said that you have Hurts, down in this tier. Did you have anybody in this tier up in tier 1, or did you just have a tier of 3 at the top?
A tier of 3 at the top, but I've got Hurts behind Richardson and Stroud.
Okay. Erickson, did you have any of these guys in tier 1, or is this all tier 2 for you?
It's all tier 2 for me.
Okay. And any of these names kind of stand out as maybe like they shouldn't even be in this tier, like they should be down in tier 3, or you think they all deserve at least being as high as where they are, Erickson?
I think that they're all deserved to be in tier 2. I was kind of looking at it versus my rankings, and it's pretty much the same guys. So I think that this is right. It's interesting, though, because I think that this tier is not, it's not an exact round, right? This tier is like kind of goes beyond like rounds 4 to round like 6, 7, 8, potentially. So even though they're in the same tier, the market's not really viewing them as that because they go several rounds apart. Whereas in the elite tier, the top 4 guys, like those guys all go basically end of round 2, round 3. Like that's where they basically are always being drafted in some of these best ball drafts and some of the ECR rankings. So for me, what kind of stands out is I just think CJ Stroud is, again, I don't want to say he's like, I think he's just overvalued here. Like, why would I draft CJ Stroud in round 4 based on solely his passing efficiency, because he's not a rushing quarterback, even though he can move. He did not rush at all last year. And you have these other guys behind him that, okay, Anthony Richardson, he runs more. Joe Burrow. Aren't we just hoping that CJ Stroud just does what Joe Burrow has done and average over 20 points per game? Like, that's something Stroud didn't even do last year. As good as he was as a rookie, he did not crest over 20 fantasy points per game last year. And that's like a big hurdle you have to get over, because if you're not getting that type of, you're not hitting that type of threshold, then what are you really doing? Like, how are you separating? Like, he obviously had these massive spike weeks, but again, he has to then deliver with all these expectations of him going as the highest. So I just think that it's like, I'll just take Burrow like 2 rounds later. Like, I feel like I can get 80%, 90%, if not the exact equivalent type of production from Joe Burrow at a later cost than CJ Stroud. So again, my point at the top, I'm looking for value for quarterback. Like, these guys touch the ball in every single play. Like, it's harder to find potentially, here's a sleep. No, they all touch the ball a lot. So I just like going for value here. And I think that there are better values at the end of this tier, especially like my favorite's probably Kyler Murray, because he adds the rushing and he has passing upside now that his offense has improved. Drafting Marvin Harrison, they got Trey McBride. So I think Kyler Murray's actually probably my favorite guy, but I agree everyone should be in this tier.
So I was not with you with your Stroud Burrow comparison. I am with you on Kyler. Kyler to me is the kind of standout value here at QB9. I think we're kind of underrating like that he's another year removed from the injury, that he added one of the best wide receiver prospects ever. Another year from Trey McBride. Like I'm really excited about Kyler this year, where he's going, and I think it's a better value than like where Stroud is. I'm still very high on Stroud this year. I mean, we've talked a lot about like how to kind of parse through the wide receivers in that offense. You know, is it going to be Diggs after making the big trade? You get a full season of Tank Dell, who was like earning a lot of targets, even ahead of Nico Collins when he was healthy. Nico Collins is also still really good. They managed to keep the offensive play caller. Like, I'm really high on Stroud, and I actually much prefer Stroud over Burrow. The wrist injury stuff and all the news about like how, you know, no quarterback has ever dealt with this. And I think I heard somebody say the other day that like he's still like talking about like having good days and bad days. Like, that is a concern to me. And Burrow has been banged up in other areas in the past. It feels like he starts every season. You know, in August there's some kind of injury he's dealing with. So he's actually my least favorite in this tier. If I'm kind of playing in this sandbox of where I'm drafting a quarterback, I'm probably looking at all four of the other guys in this tier ahead of Burrow. And I do think that there's more than a 2-round difference between Stroud and Burrow in terms of how I would rank them, even if that's what the ADP is. What do you make of all that, Fitz?
Yeah, so I'm a little torn on Stroud. I see Erickson's point. I'm generally looking for running quarterbacks here, and you know, maybe the Texans' defense continues to improve, which would further reduce Stroud's ceiling. Maybe now that they've got probably a better single running threat than they had with any of their backs last year, and Joe Mixon, that cuts into Stroud's ceiling a little bit. I mean, I'd rather have Richardson than Stroud, and I don't think that's a consensus opinion. I know I've made this point before, but I'll make it again for those who haven't heard some of our previous Fantasy Pro shows. In the 2 games that Richardson started last year, he scored 21.9 and 29.6 fantasy points. So those were good for weekly finishes of QB4 and QB2 in his 2 full games last year. And he averaged 19.4% more fantasy points per snap than Josh Allen, who led all quarterbacks in fantasy scoring last year. So there's monstrous upside for Anthony Richardson, and I think he's a better play. The one guy I find sort of interesting on this tier is Dak, and I think some people might question whether he belongs here. I kind of think he does. And one of the things I like about Dak for this year is that we know the Cowboys running back room is not great, and they didn't really do anything other than re-signing Ezekiel Elliott, who is certainly well into the back 9 of his career. And I don't know if their defense is going to be as good as it was last year. So I think Dallas could be really pass heavy this year. And if you go back and look at Dak's yearly finishes in fantasy points per game since 2019, QB3, QB1, although that was kind of a shortened season for him due to injury, QB9, QB13, and then QB5 last year, QB4 if you boot Joe Flacco off the list for the minimum number of games he had. I absolutely think you can justify Dak on this tier, and I think he's going to be a good value because I think there will be drafts where he slides to like QB10, QB11.
I think you're probably right about Dak. I want to follow up on Richardson because he strikes me as a type of quarterback that is going to creep up rankings and ADP throughout the summer as people just like get really enamored with the upside, and like perhaps rightfully so. I'm not even saying that as a negative thing. I just think it's going to happen. He's already, QB6, so he's pretty high. Besides the injury question mark of he got banged up, multiple times in those first 4 career games, and that was all he was able to last in that first season. If the injury question mark is off the table, what's keeping him out of tier 1, Fitz?
It's a good question. Just maybe that we know he's probably going to be a below average passer. And he sort of was last year in that limited sample size. But then again, this is a dude who could conceivably average double-digit rushing total. He could average 10 fantasy points rushing per game. And if that's the case and the passing numbers are just gravy, that is a pretty high floor for this guy, and you just have to hope he stays healthy.
He to me is somebody where if you're assuming he's gonna if he's gonna be banged up, he's not gonna be living up to a tier 2 level. So anyway, so I would draft him, ahead of everybody in this tier. I know I was talking about how much I like Stroud. I'm with you. I like Richardson more. I think if you're drafting him as your starting quarterback, you're going to say, like, listen, we're playing this out as if he's going to be healthy. And if he's healthy, if you guarantee me he plays 15 games this season, I don't see any way he's not a tier 1 quarterback. I think the rushing is just too good. And I think he'll improve as a passer enough just with more reps. It's going to be, a quarterback friendly offense. It's going to be a rushing quarterback friendly offense. They added A.D. Mitchell. Like I said, health is the only red flag. I don't see another one there. Where do you have Richardson ranked, Erickson?
I had a Stroud 5. So again, it's just you have to put those other guys ahead of him because I think that there is some, they have done it before, and Richardson has played. I don't. He has yet to complete like more than 4 games, so I think that does matter. You got to take into consideration that you're taking a lot more risk. So. But when we look up, he checks off all the boxes of like, what does the QB1 look like? If you build the QB1 in fantasy in a lab, he looks like Anthony Richardson, not CJ Stroud.
Richardson is the ultimate, like, I'm not trying to finish 4th place in this league. I'm trying to finish 1st. And Richardson is a guy
which we want people to do. We want people to win their leagues. And that the good thing with Richardson too is like he can break fantasy, which is why he's ranked here. And you're buying into the projection, but you should be confident because we see rushing production. That's something that carries over. It's much more sticky year to year than something like passing efficiency. So drafting CJ Stroud this high, you're betting that his touchdown efficiency and passing yards efficiency is going to repeat year over year, which historically has never really been the case. With Richardson, it's his rushing production is going to repeat year over year, which has been shown to be a little bit more sticky, assuming that he is healthy.
To me, and I don't think this is even going out on a limb, Richardson is the quarterback not in tier 1 who has by far the best chance of finishing as QB1 this year. I don't think it's even, there's nobody else I would even put in that conversation.
Totally agree.